Hello, this is Professor Asmi Parveen from Department of Psychology, Aligarh Muslim University. Today I will continue with validity and discuss internal and external validity. Validity, as we all know, is a crucial aspect when it comes to determining the accuracy of a measurement, and there are two types of validity that researchers consider: internal validity and external validity. Internal validity focuses on the design, execution, and analysis of a study to ensure that it provides reliable answers to the research questions. When internal validity is high, researchers can confidently establish a cause and effect relationship between variables. This is particularly evident in laboratory experiments where the goal is to demonstrate cause and effect. By prioritizing internal validity, researchers can enhance the credibility of their findings and draw stronger conclusions. On the other hand, external validity examines how well the findings of a study can be applied to other groups, places, or situations. It is essential to have high external validity so that research results can be utilized beyond the specific context in which they were obtained. Researchers strive to achieve this by selecting diverse groups of people and conducting studies in real world settings. By doing so, they increase the likelihood that their findings will hold true in different situations. However, it is important to note that attaining high external validity often requires making compromises with other aspects of research, such as control over variables. Now, I will discuss internal validity. This internal validity is crucial when it comes to drawing conclusions about cause and effect relationships. It focuses on the logic behind the connection between the independent variable, that is, the factor being changed or manipulated, and the dependent variable, that is, the factor being measured. To ensure high internal validity, it is important to employ proper experimental techniques and meticulously control the conditions in which we observe the impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable. By doing so, we are able to make more robust claims about causality. When conducting a study with just one group, there are several threats to internal validity that needs to be considered. And one issue is the influence of outside factors on the result. For example, if employees are informed about possible job cuts before taking a test, their increased stress levels may negatively impact their performance. It is crucial to control for unrelated variables that could potentially confound the results. Another concern in single group studies is the concept of maturation. As time passes, individuals naturally improve or change, which can affect the outcomes of the study. For instance, in a study involving new employees, their productivity levels were initially low but significantly improved after a month of learning and experience. Therefore, researchers must take into account how the passage of time and individual growth can influence the findings. Instrumentation is another factor that can also introduce errors in single group studies. If different test or measurement methods are used at the beginning and end of the study, it becomes challenging to accurately compare the data. For example, if the initial test only measures productivity for 15 minutes while the final test extends to 30 minutes, direct comparison becomes unreliable. To ensure the reliability and validity of conclusions, consistent and standardized measurement techniques should be employed. The testing effect can also impact the results of a single group study. When individuals take the same test multiple times, they become more familiar with it and may perform better as a result. This phenomenon was observed in a study where participants became more productive simply because they had previously taken the same test. Furthermore, knowledge of the test or the purpose of the study can also introduce bias into the results. These factors must be taken into account during data analysis. Another important factor that can also influence the internal validity is confounding. Confounding occurs when the effects of two variables cannot be separated, leading to a confused interpretation of the results. This is especially problematic when the experimenter cannot control the independent variable. Extraneous variables such as other factors that can also affect the results and also further complicate the situation. In some cases, a false relationship may even lead to the development of a rival hypothesis. Another important factor is selection bias. It occurs when there is bias in choosing a group of participants. This bias can create differences between groups before the experiment even begins, which can then interact with the independent variable and influence the observed outcome. Factors like gender, personality, mental capabilities, physical abilities, motivation level, and willingness to participate can all contribute to selection bias. When selecting subjects for an experiment, it is important to ensure an even number of participants with similar subject related variables. If there are differences between groups in terms of the independent variable but similarities in one or more subject related factors, it becomes difficult to determine if the difference between the groups is due to the independent variable or the subject related variable. This also makes it challenging to randomize the assignment of participants to groups. In some cases, important variables may be overlooked and not taken into account, further threatening the internal validity of the experiment. In history, there are often external factors that can influence people's behavior and responses during an experiment. These factors can range from natural disasters to political changes, and they can make it challenging to determine whether any observed changes in behavior are a result of the experiment itself or the external events. This is because these external factors can have a significant impact on individuals and their actions, potentially overshadowing the effects of the experiment being conducted. As a result, researchers must carefully consider and account for these external influences when analyzing the data and drawing conclusions from the experiments. They can ensure that their findings accurately reflect the true effects of the variables being tested rather than being distorted by external circumstances. Regression toward the mean is also a common occurrence in experiments where subjects are chosen based on extreme scores. This phenomenon can lead to errors in interpreting the results. For example, if we select individuals with very low math abilities for a study, any improvement seen at the end may not be due to the effectiveness of the course, but rather because these individuals naturally move closer to the average over time. During the analysis of the data from a study, it is important to consider certain factors that may also impact the results, and one such factor is mortality, where individuals may have dropped out of the study before its completion. It is important to acknowledge that these dropouts could potentially introduce bias and affect the observed differences between groups. Therefore, any disparity between the experimental and control groups should be carefully examined to determine if they are solely due to the treatment or if other factors are at play. Another factor to consider is diffusion, which refers to the spread of treatment effects from the experimental group to the control group. It is possible that there may be no noticeable differences between the two groups if the treatment's effects extend beyond the intended group. However, this lack of distinction does not imply that the independent variable has no effect or that there is no relationship between the dependent and the independent variables. Instead, it suggests that the treatment's impact may have diffused to the control group, making it more challenging to isolate the true effects of the independent variable. Compensatory rivalry and resentful demoralization are other potential issues that can arise in a study. Compensatory rivalry occurs when participants in the control group change their behavior in response to the study, often working harder to prevent the experimental group from showing superiority. This can make it difficult to determine the true effect of the independent variable or establish a clear relationship between the dependent and the independent variables. On the other hand, resentful demoralization may occur when the control group becomes demotivated or works less hard due to feelings of discouragement. Another potential issue is experimenter bias, which can impact the results of an experiment. Experimenter bias happens when the experimenters unconsciously or unintentionally treat participants in the control and experimental groups differently. This differential treatment can influence the outcomes of the study, and to minimize experimenter bias, it is important to keep the experimenter unaware of the conditions and the purpose of the experiment. Additionally, standardizing the procedure as much as possible can help reduce the potential for bias. Now, I will discuss strategies for enhancing single group study validity. In order to enhance the validity of single group studies, researchers can employ several strategies, and one approach is to incorporate a control group that closely resembles the treatment group. This serves to mitigate any external factors that may impact the findings of the study. When both groups encounter the same challenges, the outcomes of the study will not be influenced by these specific issues. Another method to address potential issues is by utilizing a large sample size. This helps to counteract the problem of testing as the results become more sensitive to any variations in the outcomes. Moreover, a larger sample size reduces the likelihood of bias in the selection process, resulting in more dependable and precise conclusions. Additionally, employing filler tasks or questionnaires can be beneficial in concealing the true purpose of the study. This effectively addresses problems associated with testing, threats, and demand characteristics. By keeping participants unaware of what is being studied, the validity of the results is preserved. So, by implementing all these strategies, researchers can enhance the quality and credibility of their single group studies. Now, I will discuss the threats for the validity in multi group design. When researchers are conducting a study using a multi group design, there are several factors that can affect the accuracy of the results. One concern is selection bias, which occurs when the groups being compared are not initially equal. For example, in a study, low scoring students were placed in group A while high scoring students were placed in Group B. This initial difference between the groups could potentially influence any improvements in group scores, making it difficult to determine if these improvements are truly due to the treatment being studied. Another issue to consider is regression to the mean, which means that individuals who initially score extremely high or low on a test tend to score closer to the average on subsequent tests. Since participants in this study were assigned to groups based on their initial scores, it becomes challenging to discern whether any changes in scores are a result of the treatment or simply normal statistical fluctuations. Additionally, attrition bias is another problem that arises when participants drop out of a study, rendering their data unusable. In this particular study, approximately 20% of the participants experienced this issue, with the majority belonging to Group C. This high dropout rate poses a challenge in comparing the two treatment groups to a control group, as the missing data could potentially impact the results. Consequently, applying the findings to other situations becomes more difficult due to the potential influence of the missing information. Furthermore, the way people interact with each other and the desire to fit in can also impact the accuracy of the study. Participants from different groups may engage in conversations leading to the sharing of information about the study or creating negative emotions and pressure to conform. For instance, in this study, groups B and C might feel resentful towards group A because they are allowed to use a phone during class, which could have a detrimental effect on their own performance. Enhancing validity in multi-group studies. In order to ensure the accuracy of multi-group studies, it is important to address any potential problems that may arise. One effective way to do this is by implementing changes to the study's setup. A key step in eliminating bias and ensuring fairness is the random assignment of participants to different groups. This ensures that each group starts off on an equal footing, minimizing the influence of outside factors on the results. It is also beneficial to keep the participants unaware of the purpose of the study. By doing so, the impact of social interaction can be reduced, preventing participants from being influenced by others in the study, which could potentially skew the outcomes. By employing these strategies, researchers can enhance the validity of their multi group studies, resulting in more reliable and trustworthy findings. Now, I will discuss external validity. This external validity refers to the extent to which the findings of a study can be generalized to different situations, people, places, and times. It is an important consideration in research because it determines the applicability and relevance of the results. However, there are challenges when it comes to establishing external validity, particularly in experiments involving human participants. And one of the main issues with external validity is that studies often rely on small groups of individuals or samples who may possess unique characteristics or come from specific areas. For example, researchers may use volunteers or participants from a particular community. This limited sample size and a specific population make it difficult to confidently apply the findings and the conclusions of the study to other populations or locations. As a result, there is uncertainty regarding whether the cause and effect relationships observed in this study would hold true for individuals in different contexts or without the specific qualities present in the original sample. This limitation poses a challenge to researchers and raises questions about the generalizability of their findings. Population validity is a crucial aspect of research as it influences the extent to which the findings can be applied to a larger group of people known as the population. In order to ensure population validity, it is essential to select a population that accurately represents the sample. However, when non-probability sampling methods are used for convenience, there is a risk of limiting the generalizability of the results to only those populations that share similar characteristics with the sample. Therefore, researchers must carefully consider the implications of these sampling methods in order to maintain population validity. The other type of validity is ecological validity, and in simple terms, this refers to how well the findings of a study can be applied to real life situations. It is about whether the results can be generalized to the real world. For example, using a computer based task with a mouse to simulate driving may not accurately represent what happens in actual driving conditions. Looking at a picture of an orange cat also does not capture the common obstacles we face while driving. To make a study more ecologically valid, researchers could use an immersive driving simulator that closely mimics the experience of driving in the real world. This means using a steering wheel and foot pedal instead of a computer and mouse. By doing this, the study would better reflect what it is like to drive in real life situations. Another way to increase ecological validity is to conduct the experiment on an actual driving course. This will provide an even more realistic setting for studying driving behavior. By observing participants in a real driving environment, researchers can gather data that is more representative of how people behave on the road. Threats to external validity. When it comes to making generalizations, there are several challenges that can arise and threaten the validity of the findings. And one of the major challenges is the risk of going wrong, as generalizations can be limited when the independent variable depends on other factors. These threats to external validity interact with the independent variable in various ways. One threat to external validity is aptitude treatment interaction. This occurs when the sample used in studies has certain characteristics that interact with the independent variable, making it difficult to make generalizations. For example, comparative psychotherapy studies often use specific samples such as volunteers, highly depressed individuals, or hardcore criminals, which can limit the ability to draw broader conclusions. Situational factors also play a role in restricting generalizations. Factors such as treatment conditions, light, noise, location, experimenter, timing, and the extent of measurement can all impact the applicability of the findings. These situational factors need to be carefully considered in order to ensure that the results can be generalized to other contexts. Pre-test effects and post-test effects are two additional threats to external validity. If the cause and effect relationships can only be determined after conducting pre-test or post-test, then the generalizability of the findings may be limited. It is important to consider these effects and their potential impacts on the validity of the conclusions. Horizontal effects can also pose a threat to external validity. These effects occur when the conclusions drawn from cause consequence relationships cannot be applied to other investigators or researchers. This highlights the importance of considering the limitations and potential biases that may exist within a study. This is all about internal and external validity. Thank you.